Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
Where is the line when it comes to the online harassment of public figures? Well, a group of people in France have just found out. Earlier this week, 10 people were found guilty of cyberbullying France's First Lady Brigitte Macron over repeated false online claims about her gender identity and her relationship with her husband, French President Emmanuel Macron. We'll tell you what you need to know about the landmark case in today's podcast.
Billi, a really interesting topic that we've got for everyone today. It's less about French politics and it's more about the internet and the changing way in which the internet is governed. Before we rip into the case this week and the results, why don't you explain to us who Brigitte Macron is for anyone, and I'm sure there's quite a few of us who aren't super close followers of French politics.
Yes. Well, like you said, luckily this actually isn't that much about French politics.
Yep.
All you need to know is the French president, who is Emmanuel Macron,
Yep.
and his wife, who is Brigitte Macron.
Okay.
So she is France's first lady, and she has been since 2017, which is when Emmanuel Macron became president. Now, Brigitte Macron is also a former drama teacher, and quite famously, she was actually Emmanuel Macron's drama teacher.
Yes, that's how they first met, right?
That is how they first met. And that is part of why the pair have been subject to so much speculation and misinformation and harassment since they entered the political arena all those years ago. So just some quick context to explain their relationship. Emmanuel Macron was 15 when they first met. She was 39 at the time. She was married with kids. She then divorced her husband, and the two, her and Emmanuel, they formed a relationship after he left school.
Right.
They married in 2007.
So 10 years before he became the president.
Yes. And he was 29
Right.
when they got married.
Okay, so that's a little bit about their relationship. It's unusual for us on this podcast to be talking about the personal relationships of world leaders, but when it was put in front of a court, it kind of became the focal point. Why don't you tell me about this case?
Yeah, so Brigitte Macron, she filed a legal complaint against a group of people whose posts on X, which is formerly Twitter, those posts gained a lot of attention online. And as you know, on Twitter, as you probably know, on X, I should say, you don't necessarily need a super large following in order for your post to gain widespread attention.
It's kind of like TikTok in that way,
Yes.
where one post, if you've got one follower, that can still get in front of millions of people.
Yeah. And so in terms of what those posts actually said, the group accused Mrs. Macron of pedophilia over her relationship with President Macron. And those claims were false. So the court ruled on that any suggestion of pedophilia when it comes to their relationship is wrong. On top of those claims, so there were the ones that linked the relationship to pedophilia, but then separate to that, there were also posts that spread an online conspiracy theory that alleged Mrs. Macron was born male under the name Jean-Michel, which is actually the name of her older brother.
Okay.
So some of the posts claimed that her brother had changed gender and started using her name, Brigitte.
Okay, so, I mean, there's lots of misinformation about most public figures and most political figures in the world. What do we know about the defendants, these 10 people who you keep talking about as the group that made these claims?
So we know that there were 8 men and 2 women in this group. Their ages ranged between 41 and 65, and most of them denied wrongdoing.
Okay.
There was just one of them who apologized to Mrs. Macron during the trial. Now, those who denied wrongdoing, they argued the posts were said in a satirical nature or were just meant to be taken as lighthearted jokes. As you know, on the internet, light-hearted, I guess, jokes are said all the time, but
you can't really convey tone, right? In written comments.
But what this court found is that they were malicious in the intent behind these posts and that they could not have been considered lighthearted in nature when they were making such serious claims like pedophilia.
So just clarify for me, what exactly was the crime that they were prosecuted and ultimately found guilty of?
So cyberbullying and online harassment, which is the same thing.
Okay, so they went and they tried to defend themselves against these crimes. They lost, they were found guilty, and they were sentenced, right?
They were sentenced. I will also just quickly mention that one other thing that they said in their defense is that they said some of what they posted should actually be cause for legitimate public debate. So this actually should be something, they said, that should be out there for the public to debate and make up their own mind on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, I'm not very familiar with French defamation law and French free speech law, but it sounds like it's kind of the same principles that we have here in Australia, which is you're allowed to make fun of political figures as political satire, and it's very hard to sue someone, for example, for defamation because of that. And you're also allowed to have discussions about topics which are really relevant to public interest and they deserve to be talked about in public.
Yeah.
It sounds like they tried to argue that these topics, the pedophilia allegations and the gender questions were relevant to the public discourse and or meant to be funny, and they lost on both of those accounts.
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
Exactly. They argued that, but the court overruled them and said, no, this was actually cyberbullying and was malicious in its intent.
So they're going to prison?
So they were found guilty of cyberbullying and they were given something called suspended prison terms, which just means that they can remain in the community under really strict conditions.
Yep.
And if they break those conditions, then they will go to jail.
Yep.
One person was actually jailed immediately because they failed to turn up to court. That was one part of the sentence. Another part is that they had to receive mandatory online harassment awareness training, which I didn't know was a thing, but it is a thing. And then there were also fines involved. So each defendant was fined around 1,000 Australian dollars, and they were also ordered to collectively pay about 17,500 Australian dollars. Again, I've just done the conversion in compensation to Brigitte Macron.
It actually is interesting to hear you explain this case in the context of other news reports that came out last week talking about how France might follow Australia's lead in legislating a under-16s social media ban. It sounds like they're kind of on the front foot here in terms of legislating and regulating social media.
Well, you could definitely say that Emmanuel Macron is at the forefront of, creating this push to crack down on social media in France.
Yeah, but I mean, even the fact that if you think about how many anonymous posters there are on the internet, the fact that they had people of the same nationality as them that they could prosecute in a national court, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Wait, I have one more thing to add with the sentence. They also, the defendants, some of them have been banned from using X, which is the social media platform that was involved in this case. They've been banned from using it for 6 months.
The other thing I thought of was Candace Owens, the US political commentator, because Brigitte Macron is also suing her, right?
Yes. So there are actually several ongoing legal actions that have been brought forward by Mrs. Macron. This is one of them. There is also Candace Owens, and then there are also others. So there's quite a few. In terms of Candace Owens, she's definitely the most high-profile person who Mrs. Macron has tried to sue or is suing. For anyone who doesn't know Candace Owens, she is an American right-wing political commentator, and she's been known for promoting conspiracy theories online. You might recognise her name because the Australian government did refuse her entry to the country when she tried to come here for a speaking tour. Now, Mrs. Macron filed a defamation lawsuit against Owens last July over her claims that Mrs. Macron was born a man.
So there's same gender claims that you talked about in the other case.
Owens actually published an 8-part YouTube series called Becoming Brigitte, which included those claims. So this wasn't just, a post here or there. This is an 8-part.
An offhanded comment.
Yeah, no, this is something that was very carefully considered in how it was published, clearly, if it's an 8-part YouTube series. And separate to the gender claims, she also actually claimed that the Macrons are blood relatives. And there were a whole range of other claims that I won't get into, but, it was much larger than just the gender point. Now, that case is yet to go to trial, but will be very high profile when it does. I We'll also just quickly mention that there has been another ruling on this kind of case before. It actually involved one of the same defendants sentenced this week.
Interesting.
Now, that case initially ruled in Mrs. Macron's favour, just like this one that we're spoken about today did, but then it was overturned on appeal. And the appeals court said the reason that it was overturned is because they concluded that saying someone has changed their gender or accusing someone of changing their gender is not necessarily an attack on their honour, which is the core principle of defamation law.
A really messy part of the law, I think, all of this. And what really stood out for me is that we're essentially talking about trolling here. And in what is quite a new space, the internet, and it's quite, now it's standard that all political leaders are trolled across every platform. We haven't seen too many cases like this where trolls are actually prosecuted and prosecuted successfully by a high-profile person, as clear-cut as the French court has decided here.
Yeah, and it's also a story about fake news.
Yeah.
Like you and I know, people are posting fake news on not just you and I know, everyone knows this.
Sure.
That people are posting fake news to the internet all the time. And at what point does it cross a line where a court needs to actually get involved here?
Yeah.
Whether that's because you've posted something that is completely untrue or because it's actually really hurting someone. I also think, just to end on this note, I briefly said it before, but what's particularly interesting about this case is that these weren't necessarily people with really large followings.
Yeah.
Some were, but some weren't. And you don't need to have a large social media following for your words to make a difference in the arena of social media and the arena of internet. You can, be someone who doesn't have many big followers, but you can still have a really huge impact with your words. And that's what this case is also about.
Which I guess is the beauty and scary part of algorithms, that your words with 100 followers can actually explode to millions and millions. Billi, thank you for taking us through that really messy and constantly evolving part of the law. As we know from the end of last year, this is a really major area of law reform, is the way in which online claims are presented to court and prosecuted successfully. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you. It's not often that I'm explaining the law to you.
I know, it's quite fun.
But it's quite a pleasure.
It's really interesting. And thank you for joining us today on TDA. We're going to be back in the afternoon with some of those evening headlines for you. But until then, have a wonderful day.